Welcome back, Flyers nitty-gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili, Gianarakos, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, Yariv. We're about middle of the week here, and in terms of hockey in general, we're getting closer to the regular season,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that means things amping up just in terms of training camp battles, roster cuts from the Flyers' perspective, and just figuring out what the opening night lineup's going to be. So we really have a ton to talk about in terms of Flyers news, a lot of
Yep.
things to go through, and it's going to be a great episode. How you doing, my friend?
I am good, and for all of those reasons, I am so fired up. I always text you like the day before. I'm like, dude, I'm so excited to podcast. And it's actually super legitimate. Like, there's just so much to talk about and to dig
Yeah.
into. And, we got the Michkov stuff to dig into. And, eventually all the other prospects are going to start playing around. Like, we're not talking about Cutter Gauthier right now, but that's because he's not playing. And, there's going to be a lot to talk about, throughout the entire year. And right now there already is. There's so many storylines going left to right. We don't even need to write big topic lists. We just have like smaller topic lists that we did in the off season, but we don't have to squeeze anything. Everything is just like there's so much to talk about each one of them.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
Fun. It's a fun and exciting time for hockey right now, especially right before the season. And I mean, I think it's going to be, from a Flyers perspective, there's going to just be a lot of different factors this whole season and a lot of things to keep an eye on. And I think, there might be a potential even for them to surprise a little bit. And we'll get into that too. So,
Yes, we will. Yeah, so let's get right into it. Before we start, though, I'm going to do my usual spiel here. Please like, subscribe, share our stuff out if you can. It's a humongous help to us. Again, we know that the Phillies and the Eagles are kind of taking over right now, as they should, as we're recording right now. In about an hour, the Phillies start their playoff run. So good luck to the Phils. I know everybody's ramped up for that, and I'll be watching that after we record. But yeah, good luck to them. It's going to be awesome. The Eagles are 4-0. So we get it. We get it. But there is Flyer stuff coming. So just a reminder, hit the bell. We're going to keep everybody informed as we move forward. The Flyer season will ramp up. And there's some good stuff to actually talk about this year with the Flyers. I don't feel the same malaise as there was last year. And it does feel like the Flyers are going in the right direction. So, again, plenty to talk about. And, keep the comments coming. We are trying to read and respond to all of them. You guys are amazing. So keep that coming. Yeah, we really, really, really appreciate it. And shout out to Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Remember to go get yourself a cheesesteak. All right, let's get into it. We have a few topics to talk about today. We're going to get into Michkov. We'll talk about some reductions in the training camp rosters. The Flyers kind of whittle their way down to a final lineup, at least the opening night lineup. We're going to recap the game, the win against the Boston Bruins. There were some games prior to that, but obviously this is the most recent one, and maybe the most relevant, closest to the final lineup that we've seen so far. We're going to talk about some potential call-ups and what that is really about. We'll talk a little bit about Sanheim and some of the other players. We'll also talk about a little bit of the Phantoms, and then we're going to end in a deep dive of the Flyers and Phantoms roster. Kind of where they are right now and how we can kind of project it moving forward a little bit. All right, so let's get into the first thing. So first and foremost, shout out to Matvei Michkov and HC Sochi for shoving one down SKA St. Petersburg throat and making Roman Rottenberg eat his own words as a man who gave probably the best player on his team zero opportunity and played him 3 minutes in one game. Michkov got his sweet, sweet revenge as HC Sochi beat SKA in a game, in a one-on-one matchup, in their first game matchup against one another. And I believe it's been a few years since Sochi even won a game against SKA. And Michkov walked away with a goal, 2 assists, all of his plays beautiful. Probably could have had more, and just really the ultimate response to a coach that didn't want to give you an opportunity for various reasons. One, Russian culture and tradition within the KHL league of not really playing young guys, but also, maybe a personal thing because as of right now, I believe this is still the case. Matvei Michkov is number 6 in point per game in the entire KHL, and would be a top producer on SKA, even by Sochi's numbers. So, like I said, and like we both said during the preseason, for SKA, when you were watching Michkov play center and quite frankly outplay all of his teammates, him being benched was not because of his play on the ice, and obviously was something else. And it proves it. And I bet they wish they had him now.
Yeah, I think when you just assess the game, we kind of mentioned it in earlier episodes that for Michkov, playing against his former team and the team that loaned him away, and really the team that did not give him an opportunity, was going to be a huge motivating factor for him. And if you saw any of the game here, you can definitely see that was the case. Like, he was a man possessed just in terms of board battles, puck pursuit. He was working very hard on every shift. You could tell just due to that, the game meant a lot to him. Just the puck pursuit, willingness to get into battles, things like that, the little aspects of the game. And that's not even talking about the scoring and what he actually accomplished on the score sheet there. So he had 19 shifts total in his revenge game versus SKA, 15:38 time on ice, 53 seconds power play time. He 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 shots on goal, a block shot, 2 hits, and he's 1 for 1 on the faceoff dot. His maximum speed in the game was up to 34.60 kilometers an hour, and he traveled 3.94 kilometers of distance in that game. He was also named the player of the game, which is, quite a big accomplishment as well, especially for a player of his age in a league like the KHL. It's a pro league, and going up against his former team, it must be like a really sweet thing to happen for Michkov, and he must just feel great that he was able to have such a performance against his team in the past. And it's really interesting because if you think about it from Scott's perspective and just looking at how he's playing right now, they probably wish that they never loaned him away, because they're a team right now that is struggling for offense. And Michkov is a player who's putting up offense in the KHL at this point. In 8 games for HC Sochi, he's got 4 goals, 6 assists, 10 points, and he has 1.25 points per game, and that's 3rd in the entire KHL within his 8-game span with HC Sochi. I believe you were saying, Yariv, that he's 6 overall if you count in the games with SKA where he barely played, but just shows, like, when he's playing, when he's active, when he gets ice time, he's a contributor on the ice, right? So it just came down to, for SKA and what happened there, a lot of politics. Russian traditionalist values, in the sense that, okay, you're an 18-year-old player. You typically are not an impact guy in the KHL at that age for most. So they pigeonholed him in that kind of status, but they did not realize that he's not like every other 18-year-old that's typically going to be playing in the KHL, right? So you could see just like the way he played in that game, some of his goals and just the IQ on the ice, like the goal that he scored where he's first off finds a gap right in the middle of the ice and splits defenseman, rushes up the ice, quick pass back to his teammate passed it back to him right for the goal. Like, it's just great positioning, great teamwork on the give and go, and it just shows, what a special player he is on that one specifically.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that they're doing that to Demidov as well, who is projected to be a top 3 pick in this upcoming draft as well. So, Rottenberg can do whatever he likes, and, again, it's his team. But my attitude always is like, and this is where you got to give credit to somebody like Tortorella. I don't think John Tortorella would do something like this. I don't think if he's got a guy who's outperforming everybody on the team, that he's just going to be like, yeah, you get 3 minutes a night.
Well, it's about creating plays at the end of the day, and it's about making an impact on the ice. If you watch those preseason games, he was very impactful. He might have not been the best player on SKA, for example, but he was one of their best players, and he was contributing on the score sheet every night. So for them to ignore that just due to his age and not play him, personally, at least with hockey,
stubbornness.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, if the player is going to earn it and he's going to play to a level that deserves the ice time that he's getting, then you should play him, right? Like, if, let's say he's 18 and he has that pedigree that Michkov has, but he did not play anywhere close to that level. He wasn't scoring,
Like,
wasn't playing well. Then you could understand it, right?
what
But
would they do to Connor Bedard if he was in
great
the
question.
KHL? Would they do the
Great
same thing
question.
to him? It makes me feel like they would.
Potentially, yeah.
If they're doing it to Michkov, and I'm not saying Michkov is Bedard, but he's really not far behind him. If he
No.
is, he's maybe a half a
Well,
step behind him. Maybe.
yeah. And shout out to Alexander Appleyard. He had some really great threads about
Yeah,
this.
he's been preaching
Yeah,
quite a bit about
exactly.
Michkov.
And he's, put out some really insightful stuff. So I just wanted to read this out that he tweeted. So Appleyard said, going back to last season, Michkov has in the last 21 games for Sochi 9 goals, 15 assists, 24 points, and is a +9. So that's over a point a game. It's a 1.14 points per game in that span. And let's say if hypothetically he finishes these last 54 games on that pace, he'll get 72 points in 64 games this season for HC Sochi. And the KHL scoring leader last year only had 62 points, and that was Dmitry Yaskin. So if he continues on this trajectory, like
And he's
he
gonna be the best point
like,
producer in the KHL, which
yeah, exactly.
again, he's just getting started and he's gonna get better as the year goes on.
Just scratching the surface.
And
Yep.
Shout out to Big Head Hockey who had this tweet that right now Michkov is on pace for the best total for a D+1, that's draft plus 1 year, for a KHL player in KHL history. So that is better than Alexander Ovechkin, better than Pavel Bure, better than Sergei Fedorov, better than Evgeny Malkin, better than Pavel Datsuk.
Well, yeah.
Datsuk was a late bloomer, but still, this guy is outperforming generational talents, and they're benching him and giving him away. Talk about having your head up your ass.
It's mismanagement. It's mismanagement of your own assets because
yes.
Do you not think that Scout couldn't use a guy who's in the last 8 games, top 3 in the KHL in points per game? They probably could. Most teams likely could, right? And
most teams could use the best point producer in the league. Yeah,
exactly.
I would say so.
So I just think too with Michkov, a lot of it, like he obviously has the
he's
skill.
Ours though.
Yeah. He's the Flyers property, but I mean he obviously has the skill. He has the shot, but it's just his IQ in a lot of different scenarios that stands out for me. Like in the 2 assists that he had in that game against Ska, like his positioning opened up really the goals at the end of the day because his first assist, he's at the blue line, passes it off to his one teammate. He drew in Ska defenders to him, which left his teammates open. And it just shows that, there's so much more to his game other than just goal scoring. Whereas I think before the draft and all the comparisons to Ovechkin, people thought that, this kid's a goal scorer. That's like kind of what his skill set is. But it's really, when you look at him, he is more comparable to a type of a player like Datsuk versus like an Ovechkin, just in terms of all around game.
Well,
impact.
Datsuk-like game with an Ovechkin-like shot, just without the same power. He's not like a power forward sniper, but he's still a sniper.
That's a great way to put it, actually.
Yeah, like Datsuk was more of a playmaker, but he's got defensive acumen too, especially for a guy his size and his age. Like he's blocking shots. He's a plus player.
He'll only improve.
Yeah, he's 18 years old.
He'll only improve, literally. He's not scratched the surface of his potential whatsoever at this point.
And quite frankly, the fact that he's not even a burner, and I think his skating will improve regardless. I think he'll become faster and faster as he gets bigger and stronger, and he plays on a larger rink. Like, you look at what Ovechkin did at the same age, he didn't produce as well, at least, throughout an entire season. He didn't produce at a point per game pace even, and then came to the NHL and put up 105 points the following year. If you just think about that with what Michkov is doing at the rate that he's moving, like this is a guy who could come to the Flyers and be a 100-point player when he gets here.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean too. Like you talk about the skating, right? That was something that was knocked about him, that his skating might not be to the level of like a Bedard in terms of being a burner, straight line speed. But you have to factor in the KHL ice is bigger, international ice. He's moving around.
Even a burner, I wouldn't say.
He's moving around the ice very well, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that's negative.
He's got Bedard's hands. Maybe not. I'm sorry to cut you off. Maybe not his shot, but I have never seen anybody shoot like Bedard.
Yeah, he's generational and elite in his own end on that.
I mean, that kid is just sick. I'm not putting him down at all. Like
Well, who saw? I mean, I'm sure some of
everybody
the
saw
listeners
Detroit.
here have
Yeah.
saw the play against Detroit where he just carves up like three defensemen, almost scores. Is a wizard with that over the hand
Yeah.
type
A
move on the
windmill.
defenseman windmill. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, shout out to Michkov, who is doing everything we want him to be doing, and I expect it to continue.
Yeah,
I expect this torrid pace to continue. I expect the above point per game pace. I mean, we talked about this in all preseason. Like this is exactly what I expected from the kid. So I'm
probably
not
adds more
surprised.
confidence to do
Yeah,
this against your team that loaned you away. Like,
and as he gets in better, and quite frankly, I think he still has to get in better shape too. Like I don't even think he's in peak shape. Like as a 18-year-old, like I want to see what he can do when he gets in better shape and he gets bigger and stronger and faster. He's only 18, you
yeah,
know. And look, we're going to talk about Cutter Gauthier, who looks severely impressive, and I think is also going to come into the Flyers. You know, you look at how excited everybody is about Bobby Brink. Just wait until you see Cutter Gauthier here, a guy who's going to not just like, oh, can we put him in the top 9? A guy who's going to walk into the top 6, right?
yeah.
Like we're getting it. I don't think the Flyers are exactly where they need to be, but the framework for the improvement is there. You know, outside of a number one defenseman in the system,
Yeah.
everything else is there right now. So people should be aware of that.
They're in a good place for sure.
Yeah, and we'll go through the roster and stuff like that a little bit later. So let's get into that. Okay, so the Flyers reduced their training camp roster. This has happened over past several days. We're kind of recapping everything. Some of this has already happened, but to the Phantoms, the Flyers have sent Matt Brown, Ule Lickshell. I have Matt Brown on here twice. Brendan Fury, Adam Brooks, Rhett Gardner, Cooper Maruti, Louis Belpedio, and Victor Mete. Mete did have to go through waivers. He did clear. Everybody there cleared. And then today, there was Tanner Laczynski and Cal Petersen were also sent to the minors or through waivers to Lehigh theoretically, but they should be both going to Lehigh. Neither one of them are really that surprising. And then just so add into the mix that Carson Bjarnason and Mateo Mann were also sent back to juniors. Again, none of this is really surprising. This happened over the past several days or maybe even week now. So the training camp roster has been reducing. The two people I think we really want to dig into here, because the rest are all pretty typical. Maybe Victor Mete. He did have a pretty decent camp. He does have NHL experience,
He
but I
looked
don't think.
decent.
Yeah, he didn't look bad. I don't think he was ever really brought in here to be like a definitive guy. He's almost like the new Nick Sealer in a
Yeah.
way, right?
He's a depth option, depth call up for
W-
you as experience, and isn't somebody green that you're going to throw in potentially if someone gets hurt, right?
Exactly. And he'll be there to stabilize the defense as well as Louis Belpedio, because he's going to be pretty green, young back end for the Phantoms. And we'll go through that. The big one there, I would say the two big ones, we'll go into Laczynski first. Tanner Laczynski. I'm not surprised he got waived here. Again, with the amount of competition, and we'll get into that at the NHL level. Laczynski is already 27 years old. I believe he's 27, 26 or 27. He's kind of past that age of development. So he really needed to kind of hit the ground running. He didn't have a bad camp. I wouldn't say he's like a throwaway guy. I think they're kind of hoping that he doesn't get claimed to some degree, because he would be quite a big asset for the Phantoms. He's already been above a point per game player at in his short stints in the AHL. He had some injury issues at the NHL level. He came in with a lot of promise, but quite frankly, I think where Laczynski is lacked is his physicality. I don't think it's necessarily that he had to score more or do anything like that at the NHL level, but they need a fourth line center. And you look at a guy like Paling, who's done exactly what we need out of a fourth line center. It kind of makes a guy like Laczynski, an afterthought, especially when you look at like Denoye, who's sitting behind him. And again, they're not going to want to throw him at fourth line center in the NHL, but already you kind of stop seeing the need for Laczynski at the NHL level. Having said that, because of his age and the fact he hasn't produced at the NHL level, I do expect him to clear. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Laczynski?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect a team to pick him up, in my opinion. Like, I think if they do, that would be a bit of a surprise to me because
Just a quick comment for those who are not aware. If a team takes a player through waivers, the condition is that you must play him at the NHL level. You can't take a
yes,
guy and keep him in your minors. So if you're taking him, it's because you think he's going to be part of your NHL team.
and
Sorry.
that's frankly probably why I don't expect him to get picked up. Because not to beat a broken record here, but every organization has their own Tanner Laczynskis, guys that they think, okay, are on the bubble, we could maybe call up. So for them to claim him, they would have to see something that really stands out.
Yeah.
And personally, if something really standed out, or stood out in the preseason here, the Flyers likely would have kept him in the roster and in the lineup. And I just don't think that's the case. And it's not necessarily because he played bad. I actually thought a couple games ago in the preseason, he actually was one of the best forwards on the ice for the Flyers. Like every time he had the puck, he was kind of making some puck handling plays, entering the zone with control. I believe he had the goal one of the other nights or something like that.
Actually, I'll look it up.
Yeah. So, I mean, he played well. It's just that if you look at the Flyers lineup and their roster and all the different types of prospects they have, it's just a matter of a numbers game. I think there's just too many other guys that may have passed him on the depth chart just due to where they've gotten drafted. And the Flyers want to give them a look, right? So that's really what it is. There's other guys that they want to kind of look at here. And due to that, I mean, it leaves Laczynski kind of being the odd man out in this situation. So it's unfortunate, but I mean, you never know what's going to occur. You never know what's going to occur in terms of, call-ups in the future and injuries. And then correction from my end, I don't think he did have a goal, but he looked good in a couple of the games that he was in. Specifically, I believe against the Devils the other night and Boston. So,
but the problem with Laczynski is that you thought he was going to come in and be like a Scott Lawton type, and he hasn't. Like Lawton's a physical player; he's a very aggressive player. And Laczynski is kind of a well-balanced player. And I think without the physicality element, like I think that's where he loses Tortorella.
Also, the penalty killing acumen. Like Tortorella's always going to be favoring players that can help on the penalty kill.
I thought he would be more.
And he hasn't really shown to be the most effective player there for the Flyers, despite doing that at the college level, at the AHL level. Whereas Ryan Poehling, they've been putting him into PK situations all preseason, and he's been looking pretty decent. So I think, as a former first-round pick that Poehling is, and somebody who, even though he hasn't reach the scoring potential, he's always been
that's your Scott Lawton type.
Yeah, he's been a solid
first round pick.
He's been a solid defensive option everywhere he's gone in the NHL so far, for Montreal, for Pittsburgh. So it doesn't surprise me that the Flyers want him in that fourth line role over a guy like Laczynski.
He's also much faster than Laczynski.
He literally last season was clipped at the highest miles per hour league wide.
Yes.
So that's over McDavid, which is crazy.
Yeah. So this is a very fast, speedy forward, right? And Poehling, who is clearly very good on draws. This is really like a case of a former. I think Laczynski was a 6th round pick. If I remember correctly. Yeah, he was a late round pick. So the fact that he's even close to the NHL, does speak to it being a successful pick. I know a lot of people are going to want to jump on him, but he's a very good AHL player. Like this is a guy who's going to be a point per game player, or at least close to it at the AHL level. So if he does play for the Phantoms, and we'll talk about this, he's going to be a humongous asset for them. And I think there's a good chance that he will. I don't know if he's going to be a call-up guy unless he, maybe surprises, but he's kind of left that age group already of being a top option for a team that's trying to develop talent, right? And maybe if you're competing for a playoff spot and you want a more veteran guy out there, you call up Laczynski. But, as far as development goes and sticking out, it really wasn't there for him.
Yeah, it was those games, the games against the Isles, the games against the Devils, he looked pretty decent. But then, he didn't really continue it. And if in his situation, for him to make the team, he needs to have lights out games night in, night out here, because there's other guys that they want to give a shot and give a chance to, which is Brink and Foerster here. And now I understand why I thought he scored, because he hit the post in one of the games against the Islanders. So close enough, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, again, not a terrible performance from him, but not good enough to make the team. So we'll see if he gets, if he gets taken. I don't expect it. I expect him to be with the Phantoms, and at the end of the day, a guy like that with the Phantoms is really not a bad thing. It's actually
Yeah,
a pretty good thing.
it's good
Um,
depth for the Flyers, really, if there's
yeah,
injuries. So
yes, because the Phantoms still matter. Them winning a Calder matters. So hopefully
went
he can
on
be
deep
part of
playoff
that.
runs. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully he can be a big part of that because he was with the Flyers last year, and quite frankly, they could have used him at times. And then the other guy that we obviously have to talk about, and I am not surprised about this at all. This
No,
would have
we've
been,
talked about it.
yeah, like Cal Petersen gets sent through waivers. His first game was obviously a disaster, but the team in front of him played like a disaster, so it exacerbated his not great start. I think Tortorella is spot on with what he said, where he said, and we mentioned it on here, while the team played horrible in that 6-0 loss to the
Need a
Devils.
save.
Yeah, he also didn't have a big save. Now, he did have a much better performance. I think it was against Boston, right?
Yes, on Friday. Yeah.
And even Torts talked about it, that he really recovered. I don't think Petersen being sent to the minors is them saying, "Hey, you're not going to have a shot again," or "Hey," but it's the safe player to waive. No one's going to take him at $5 million a year. The Flyers already kind of knew this. They knew what they were walking into, and he is a buyout candidate, not for this year. I don't think anybody's going to trade for him, even at 50% retained. So I think realistically, there is a good chance he gets bought out next year in a similar style that D'Angelo was bought out. The cap hit would be very similar at 1.6 million over 2 years, right? So I expect that he probably will be a leader for the Phantoms. And again, the Phantoms do matter. And it's a big deal for us if the Phantoms are really good. They've been good and they've been getting better, but they haven't been an elite team in the AHL. And if he can rebound his game, it opens him up to, potentially a team taking a risk on him. But also most likely, just supporting the young guys that we need within the organization, because this team is going to be under the cap for a little bit regardless. So they can afford to, kind of keep Petersen.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate for Petersen because obviously he was trying to use this opportunity to reestablish himself as a goalie in the NHL this season. Um, but in the circumstances he's entering with the goalie depth the Flyers have, I just think from the get-go, it might have not been a realistic thing. And it's just due to how the contracts are situated with Felix Sandstrom not being able to clear waivers. And now you have Petersen at, a $5 million cap hit. And just based on his performances, right, the last couple seasons, there's no way that anybody's going to pick him up. So as you said, right, it's the safe bet for the Flyers. Like, we have to be honest, even though he looked okay, like he had a really bad first game. That's the whole team in general. You can't place that on him. The second game, when he came in after in the third period, that's a real tough situation for a goalie to come in, right? Especially a goalie who might be lacking confidence. And the Flyers, they were in a position in that Boston game where they needed to come back and tie the game and then ultimately win here in the shootout. But like, for Petersen to come back, he's probably thinking in that situation, okay, like, this is not a nervous thing for me, but I need to make sure that I play well here. This might be my last opportunity to really show the brass that, hey, like, I could be an option for them at the NHL level. And he did do that. He was really strong, made a couple big saves. And the most telling thing for me in that game is he lets a goal in not as soon as he enters the game, but shortly after. He lets a 5-hole goal in, and it was a very weak goal. And as a goaltender, the last thing you want to do is let something in 5-hole, because as a butterfly netminder, that should be the most covered part of your net and of your game, right? 5-hole goals is not something any goalie wants. And that's what he let in there. And he bounces back really nicely after that goal. He does not scramble. He stays consistent. He makes some big saves. He pulls the win out for the Flyers in that Boston game. But it's just not enough when you compare, the potential of Sandstrom and Sandstrom and an Ersson here, right? Like,
Yeah.
Ersson has potential to be a starter. Sandstrom, though he might not have the potential to be a starter, he's shown that he can be a solid backup, and that's 1B type potential could be there for him down the line, just due to him being a starter in Sweden in the past. So I just think the options the Flyers have versus Petersen are just better, and they might give better performances than he would as a backup. So
I'm sorry.
why wouldn't you go with who might give you a better chance to win, right? And that's ultimately what the Flyers want to do here. So.
Yeah, I will say this though: if Petersen was making $1 million a year,
it might be different.
I think it would be different. I think they would have potentially been like, okay, well, he actually played pretty decent. He is the veteran guy. Somebody might take a chance on him at $1 million a year, but at $5 million a year,
they know it's not
you're
happening.
waiver proof. You know what I mean? It's essentially nobody is going to take that jump.
Well, keep your assets, right? Like, why would you waive Sandstrom when there's a bunch of teams right now that are looking for goaltending depth in the league?
We will talk about that, and I feel like I am the minority in all this, but I think it's very important to remember that this is preseason. And I feel like people are getting a little bit ahead of themselves there. And I haven't really been in front of Torts a little bit, but that would be one of the first things I asked him. Actually, I was listening to the press conference, and I was like, I'm surprised that nobody asked this. And I was like, there's no concern that, even the players that are doing well right now, that won't translate to the regular season. Again, I brought that up. It happens all the time. It doesn't mean that the guys won't do it. It doesn't mean that they won't recover from it. But all the time we see guys come in, do really well in the preseason, and then in the NHL they
underwhelm.
They underwhelm because the caveat to all of this is that veteran players are not playing 100%, regardless of what Torts is saying.
It's a warm up for them.
Exactly.
Like guys that know they're going to make the team, they're trying to get ready. That's what this is for them. Guys that are trying to make the team, I mean, it's a whole different scenario.
Yes.
And you want to see them play well. But when everybody's going 100% once it really starts, that's, when you see if guys are going to stand out or continue to stand out.
Yeah, right? The precision and the physicality goes up a lot from preseason to regular season. And then obviously we know the postseason, which is a whole different animal itself, and that goes up another gear. So and we'll talk about that when we talk about like the roster and whatnot. And I noticed that it's not being talked about, so we're going to talk about that here because I'm as excited as everybody else about the players who are doing well, but that is in the back of my mind. And I do not take an opening night lineup at that seriously anymore. Like other people might be so excited about the opening night lineup. I don't think that way.
Well, it changes vastly usually throughout a season.
Exactly. So. It almost doesn't matter to me. I'm all about asset management. And something that everybody should remember when you hear Tortorella talking about who makes the team, what's important to him, it's not his call. It's he feeds the info to the GM. But at the end of the day, it's the GM's call. And he's the asset manager, not the coach. Right?
Yeah.
So that will come into play. It is somewhat Tortorella's call. I'm not saying he's going to be ignored or, talked down to. And if he's very persistent and he truly believes, but we saw this stuff last year. Like Tyson Foerster was almost a point per game player and was still sent back to the minors, right? Like, so everybody should keep that in mind. Just because you're seeing a young player kill it does not mean, one, that it translates to the regular season, and two, that the GM is going to approach it in the same way. And I see people online talk about the old school hockey men. It's like, no, you are misunderstanding. There's a reason that all of the hockey men do this. It's asset management.
Yep.
And it's required, especially in a cap age.
Why would you lose something that you could potentially trade or use in a trade later down the line?
Or they're using an injury because guys get injured all the time.
Well, what's your thoughts, Yariv, here? Obviously, for backup now, it's Sandstrom, Ersson. That's going to be kind of the battle.
I still believe... look, I don't know exactly how the Flyers are thinking. I don't know how other teams in the league are thinking. We saw one goaltender taken in waivers so far. We know that there's, this looming Hockey Canada thing. Are you really going to risk moving your number 3 goalie for nothing if you think somebody might take him? Having said that, the time to waive players is now.
You can try to get them through. Yeah, well, this is the time you could sneak a guy through waivers.
Balance that.
Might get claimed, right? Because there's so many guys getting put on waivers. Teams try to do it all the time.
Well, I noticed that Sandstrom has actually played really well.
He has,
but nobody is even talking about that. They're like, and I 100% believe.
We mentioned it. We mentioned it. But
I 100% believe Ersson is the second best goalie on this team. I am not.
Talent-wise,
Yeah,
100%.
and even game wise, like he looks NHL ready. But do you really want Ersson sitting behind Carter Hart? Like, again, that might sound great to you guys, but you're not even going to see him play half the time. It's going to be Carter Hart.
Well, yeah, literally, right? Like Hart's going to get around, his 50 games, something along those lines.
He's going to be playing what, 60 to 70% of the season.
Yep.
And again, I know Ersson will be the better backup, but if we're talking about the first week, 2 weeks of the season, why are we, I don't know. All of it has to be weighed against itself, right? And if there's a clear-cut difference, I get that, right? And we can talk about that stuff too. There's some guys that you just can't deny, right?
Yeah, if they play so well, right? Like there's a lot of factors.
Or if you're not deep at that position.
I think this is probably, aside from, Brink, Foerster, which we'll talk about later, this is probably the second most intriguing camp battle right now. Personally, for me, it's a hard thing to navigate because Ersson has played really well. Sandstrom's also played well, albeit he hasn't played as much as Ersson. Like Ersson's gotten the full game last game. He played 2 periods the other night. So, I'm interested to see kind of what unfolds. Like if you look at the last game against Boston, can you really, say there's anything wrong about Ersson's game? 1 goal gets let in on the power play where really nobody's covering a guy. Nobody's covering a guy in front. Like that's a perfect game from a goalie, especially too for a young goalie when you're not getting a lot of shots against. That can be a really tough game for a goaltender if you're not feeling the puck out all the time.
He's so poised in net too.
Yeah, very calm, making those calm saves. Not a lot of rebounds, and he's really good laterally, and the athleticism is there, right? And the thing is with Sandstrom, though, obviously you can't, he's not waivers exempt, and that's the big deal. So I just wonder what's going to happen here. Like personally, if I'm the Flyers and just looking at, Ersson's age, still a very young goalie, I think it's probably best for him and his development to play every night, right? Like you don't want him to be sitting behind Hart, unless for some reason they plan to split these two. Like if that's the plan, let's say they say, hey, we have 2 really good goalies. You have Hart, we have Ersson. Let's split them.
Plan. Yeah, and that could be it.
If that's what they want to do, then I think sure you can keep Ersson. But if you plan to use him as a traditional backup, where Carter Hart is getting 8 out of every 10 games or 9 out of every 10 games,
isn't it better to use Sandstrom as that?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just it's a disservice to Ersson because he's still developing his game. Not to say that Sandstrom isn't, but Sandstrom's a lot older. He's at a different path in his development right now, where it looks like he might not ever be a starter. He might be a backup.
This might be his last season here, right? So you can risk that with him playing him only a handful of games every 10. He plays 2 out of the 10 games for you, or whatever, 3 out of 10 games.
So it's going to be interesting to see what occurs here, right?
Yeah. And I would talk about it all the time. If Carter Hart, who's had some injuries, gets injured, would you rather have just Petersen and Ersson available, or would you rather have Petersen, Sandstrom, and Ersson available?
Well, then you ensure that the Phantoms still have a quality level goaltender as well. So organizationally, it just makes a lot more sense, right?
Exactly. Asset management.
Yeah, but we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting, and I think for the Flyers, it's really a good problem. Like,
yes.
When did we ever? Usually, the Flyers' goaltending situation is a mess, and it is not in this scenario.
It's a luxury right now.
Yeah, exactly. They're in a good place goaltending wise, which is good.
I mean, and quite frankly, people freak out about a backup goaltender, but if you're upset that Ersson is not sitting on the bench to start the season, and you're upset that Sandstrom is the one sitting on the bench, I don't know what your focus is on. If Sandstrom, like let's say they play Sandstrom in the last game here and he shits the bed, then I think there's a good chance he's getting waived. But if he comes in and he plays the way he did the last few games where he's been competent every single time, what are you going to say? Oh, yeah, dump him anyway.
Well,
why?
I think we just have to be wary here on how we're judging goaltenders. Like it's a very confidence-based game.
He's also just entering that 26, 27-year-old
That's
range.
what I mean. Like he's entering his prime right now as a goaltender. And, he had a lot of experience in the SHL in the past, and he played well in those situations. So, like, when I look at it like that, I just don't think, it's a bad thing to have Sandstrom play. I think he's only going to be better this season than last season, because last season was really his first taste at the NHL. Like, he's
Yes.
only going to improve. He's still a young goalie too.
Look, but if the Flyers, who are much more well tapped into the league than Vasili and I, know how the league views Sandstrom, and
If they know no one will claim him, then yeah.
then they'll go for it. They'll be like, yeah, then we'll go Ersson and we'll try to split up the games here. We'll give Ersson fine, and they might know that, right? But Vasili and I can't make that call. All we're doing is pointing out that there is some risk there. People could say that there's no chance he gets taken. That might be the case, and we'll talk about Wade Allison. And that's another guy that's in that camp where Tortorella, that might not be his favorite guy, but can he play in the NHL level? Is it a guy that you really want to lose for nothing that you took in the second round that another team will most likely snag up? I don't know, and you lose him for nothing after developing him, and he scored goals and played physical, and maybe the organization's done with him, right? That's possible too. But I don't really think so, considering how they've used him so far, that they're like done with him. Otherwise, we would have seen that already, just like the way we saw with Laczynski, right? Where I think the Flyers are kind of done with him at the development and thinking that he has a chance to be on the Flyers roster.
I personally think with Allison, it's his last shot, really, with the organization. One of his last shots.
Yeah, I did. This season. Yeah. But I don't think that they're ready to say it's your last shot.
Oh, not in training camp. Yeah,
right. Exactly.
I just mean this year in general. Like, if he does not play well and give them what they're looking for, I think they're going to move on from him.
Sure.
And
but that would make sense.
Yeah, organizationally, look at all the right wingers that they have in the system. You're stocked up, so it's not like you're really losing out. But in this situation, let's say you do waive him and he gets claimed, and then injuries hit. That's when you think back and say, well, we probably shouldn't have managed him the way we did.
The recent example we had of that was Nicolas Aube-Kubel, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And again, he's not a guy we needed to hold on to. He's having some success around the NHL, but under Fletcher, we waived Nicolas Aube-Kubel. We had a bunch of injuries, and then we're like straggling, or we're struggling to find guys to call to the NHL. Meanwhile, he's now playing for Colorado, scoring goals. And we're like, well, we could have used a guy who's physical and rowdy.
And has a scoring touch.
Yeah. Kind of similar to Wade Allison, So again, we just have to see what kind of GM Briere is. And I don't think he is similar to Fletcher. So I am kind of banking on asset management more than... And I don't think Fletcher was the worst ever at that. I think people give him a harsher bill than what... I don't think he was a great GM, obviously. But I think people try to act like he was more irrational than he actually was. I just look at that one as maybe they thought he would have gone through too, right? Like, they might have thought that Nicolas Aube-Kubel was going to go down to the Phantoms. And maybe they didn't think anybody would be interested. Because again, you got to play these guys in the NHL. You're not putting them on your minor league affiliate. Okay, let's get into kind of the Flyers' most recent win against the Boston Bruins. They beat the Bruins 3-1 in an absolute dominant game. Yeah, the score was 3-1. I literally think the Flyers could have won this game 7-0. They dominated possession. I will say this is the most precise I have seen this team in training camp. And probably as precise as I've seen them all last season during the regular season. They still weren't playing with 100% of their lineup, but the Bruins, and this must be brought up, and you get excited when you see these games, but Marchand's not playing there, Pasternak's not playing there, and it shifts their lineup. They were outgunned in this game. Having said that, the Flyers took full advantage of that. They looked like an all-star team versus the Bruins against this one.
Well, I think it would have been something to be concerned about if the Flyers did not win this game with majority of their starting lineup, essentially, versus the Bruins B squad here, right? Like, they don't have their two best players, Marchand, Pasternak. They even have their backup in, right? Like, Swayman starting.
McAvoy wasn't playing.
Yeah, right? So, a lot of their good players are not in here, and that's going to be a typical thing in the preseason for a road game. We saw the Flyers do the same thing when they were on the road, right?
Having said that, the Flyers played better in that road
game. It's true. Yeah. The Flyers' last three games, right? Like the win against Boston in overtime in the shootout, the loss to New Jersey in overtime, and then the win against Boston last night, 3-1 here. They've considerably gotten better with every game, I think.
Yes.
And this has been their best game of the preseason.
By far.
Yeah, 100%. And they really controlled the game probably after the first 10 minutes, right? Like it was pretty even to start out. And then once Boston scored and then they tied it up, it was really all Flyers after that. They kind of just put the foot on the pedal and just did not stop. A lot of extended zone time, a lot of good puck movement in transition. I thought York looked well, like played really well with wrist the line. I thought Sanheim looked pretty good too.
They were. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Flyers, they outshot the Bruins 25-13, so that just shows, right? They're creating a lot more.
I have 24-14. That's what NHL.com says. Maybe it's not consistent.
I have the score, so the score's wrong. We'll go with that.
Okay.
The score app's wrong. NHL.com is probably right.
Okay.
But no worries. Either way, they outshoot the Bruins by a large margin. If you're looking at guys on the bubble here, Bobby Brink, another big game. He doesn't score, but he created a lot of chances, and he's really tenacious in the pursuit of the puck, even for a little guy, right? Like he's a smaller player, but he's not afraid to mix it up and get into the board battles. And that was something that's been said about him from his scouting report, even when they drafted it.
When he came into the NHL before his injury.
Exactly. Even when they drafted him, right? Like that was something that was described about his game, that he's not afraid, even though, with his lack of size, to go to the front of the net, get dirty and go to those areas where you need to score the goals. And I think obviously Tortorella is probably seeing that and saying, hey, this guy has the skill to his game, but he also isn't afraid to mix it up. And he probably likes that,
and
right?
He loves that stuff.
Exactly.
Also to note about team play, the Flyers were 0 for 5 on the power play, but you would have not.
They looked really good.
It's the best the power play has looked in. I don't know, definitely better than it did all last season. Farabee talked about it in the interview, and he said that the faceoffs were a big part of that. And shout out to Morgan Frost in that game, who was an 81.8% on
9 for 11.
Yeah, 9 for 11, and Tortorella called that out uninstigated, right? Like nobody asked him about Frost. He brought that up himself. Frost also had 2 assists in that game and a +1. Really good.
That was Frost's
best showing.
That was Frost's best showing for sure.
Totally. 15, 16 worth of ice time as well.
Yeah, exactly. And really the question too was about Couturier and his face-off acumen.
Yeah. He had 59.1% in that game.
Yeah, which is great.
20 minutes. +1, 1 assist.
Yeah, which is great, right? And then Torts, throws in the compliment for Frost. So it just kind of shows that, he's noticing all these players. And, even though maybe there might have been something there between these two, you could tell that, Tortorella is going to acknowledge a player when he plays well. And that's something that players love about him. He's not going to mince words. If you're playing well and you're, providing impact, he's going to play you. And an interesting thing too is I thought that was Foerster's best game of the preseason as well. Like he's had some good looks on the power play. He was moving the puck well when he did have it.
He had 17-17 worth of ice time, which is
they played him
second most of forwards.
But one thing you got to note, and we can kind of get into this and talk about it, is Foerster gets dropped to the fourth line in the second period. He ends up playing with Poehling and Allison. That's where Brink starts off in the game. Brink moves up to the top line with Couturier and Farabee, and he replaces Foerster on the power play from the second onward. So I think that's something telling. Like maybe both of these guys do end up making the team. It's quite possible. You never know what's going to happen.
Sure.
But just for the coach in a game where he's playing, majority of his starting lineup to make that adjustment. I know he said, we just wanted to shake things up and there's nothing to read into that battle. But I think, it's kind of lip service in the sense that, why would you move him up if you didn't think that he could handle playing those top line minutes, right?
He did also add with Brink that he's having trouble keeping him out of the top 6.
Exactly.
Which I thought was very telling. Now, that also could be one of those things where you're trying to call out your veterans a little bit, being like you're being outplayed by a young kid. But like I said, like we just talked about, 10, 15 minutes ago, veteran players have a tendency to not give 100% in preseason, whether you want them to or not. They're not dumb. They don't want to get injured. They already know they made the team. They're not giving 100%, regardless of what everybody thinks. And it's a big reason why a lot of young players, and we talked about this last week or the week before. I brought it up. Expect young players to have strong showings, it tends to happen. You can look at every team around the league. Young players excel during preseason. The ones that are either on that bubble or the ones that are about, making the NHL or made the NHL last year or the year before that. This is where they really, have an opportunity to showcase that. So that does tend to happen, but it doesn't necessarily always translate into the regular season. And it's a long season. And a lot of these guys are not used to the NHL physicality and defensive play and the fact that teams pick up on how you play and adjust to you, and especially star defensemen. And we talk about Bobby Brink right now, but what happens when Bobby Brink is playing against the best defenseman in the world and they've already looked into his game and they started to read, how to stop him? This is where they kind of hit that wall. Doesn't mean he's going to. Again, I loved what I saw from Brink. I'm not putting him down, and I totally see the appeal of starting him in the NHL, but that has to be taken into account. Having said that, this is something most people don't realize either, that I haven't heard talked about at least, is that Bobby Brink is older than Tyson Foerster.
Yeah.
He's in the Cam York range, and if he didn't have that hip surgery, there's a good chance he would have been in the NHL last year at least
and earned his position already.
He looked very promising when he first came over at the end of the season, the prior 2 seasons.
When the puck follows you, it's a good sign that you're doing the right things on the ice. You're in the right positions. You're putting yourself in places to have touches with the puck. And when you watch Brink these last couple of games, the puck just seems to go where he is. And that's not by coincidence. He knows where to be to create, those opportunities for himself.
Dynamic.
He's showing the IQ for sure. And I think we can't ignore the fact that, he's been getting better usage than Foerster coming up here. It's going to be really interesting. I think this last preseason game is going to be very telling and might be the deciding factor between the two here, right? Like if one of them really pops, I think it could go to them depending on what happens.
Yes,
but we'll see.
Because they're both waiver exempt too.
Exactly.
So the risk is minimal, right?
Well, for example, right? Let's say Brink makes the team here and the Flyers play him for the first 12 games of the season and he happens to fall off from his preseason play. And Tyson Foerster goes to the AHL and puts up a point a game. They can do a big swap, and it's a snap of the fingers for them, right? So, sometimes it's to reward guys like Bobby Brink. They might want to reward him and just say, hey, you played really well. You're arguably our best forward all preseason. If we're going to be constructing our lineup on a merit-based system like Tortorella has stated in the past, what does that say to send him down, your best player in the preseason, right? Who is a guy that it's not like they haven't wanted to try him in the NHL. They haven't wanted to give him opportunities in the past, right? It'd be different if it's like a lifetime AHL player or something, but it's a guy that's shown to have considerable upside. He was your second round pick. So we'll see how it unfolds, but I think we're going to see a lot of Brink and Foerster in the NHL this season, despite which one of them actually cracks the lineup.
I think we're going to see both of them. Absolutely. And don't be too married to these opening night lineup things because it really doesn't matter. We didn't see Cam York in the opening night lineup, and by the end of the season, he was stapled.
He was a mainstay
to the top pairing
and looked like their best defenseman, to be honest. So.
Yeah, right. Like he was playing top pairing with Ivan Provorov by the end of the year, right? So it's this idea that they have to make the opening night lineup. It's really a fallacy, right? Yeah. It's like it's more of a reward for the young man, but it's also very disheartening if they make because they're going to have these tough conversations behind closed doors about, do we think that they can last an entire NHL season, not half an NHL season, because the AHL will allow them to get ready even more for that NHL season. They might want them to build momentum at the AHL level, say, hey,
and then
you're right there. Keep doing what you're doing. And we're calling and Tortorella hinted to this, and it was probably Elliot Denoyer. We don't really know, but he said, a guy that we really liked last year, we sent down, and that's why I assume it's Elliot Denoyer. And they sent him down, and Tortorella said he called him and he said, hey, we really like you. Adjust these things, and you'll get a call up, right? Like, you're right there. These guys, they can't. It's how you respond to these things that they're looking for, right?
Yes.
It's going to happen. They're all 21, 22. This is what I talk about. Every time people talk about being 21, 22, and it's absolute nonsense. These guys are children. So They are still learning the game. This is still not that young.
They're not fully developed at that
Yeah.
age in terms of their skill set and just what type of player they're going to turn into.
Yeah.
I think that was a great point to bring up, like how you rebound from the mistake, how you rebound from a certain play, like a certain usage. Like I thought Foerster goes down to the fourth line in that game, and him, Allison, and Palin actually have some good shifts,
Right.
and they play well. And that's something the coaching staff's looking at. They're saying, hey, like we dropped Tyson. Let's see what happens. Let's see how he takes it, right? And that's a factor too. That what's his attitude like on the bench? How's he reacting to something like that, right? So I think that's something to factor in. And I think Forster's one to watch for the last preseason game here. Just all the talk around him getting dropped a little bit in the last game. I'm interested to see kind of how he bounces back. I'm sure the staff's going to be keyed into that and how Brink continues here, and that'll probably be a deciding factor for both.
Yeah, and I think about last year when everybody was like, York got sent down, and everybody's like, "Oh, he's super upset." I'm like,
end of the world type thing. Yeah,
that was immediately. I was like, okay, and I was
let's
like,
see how he responds.
Happy, yeah, and he responded fantastic. It's like that's what you wanted. He did exactly what they wanted him to do.
Well, it shows the mental fortitude that hey, this roadblock is not gonna get in my way.
It also works.
It does.
Like there's a businessman named Alex Hormozy. Those who are not aware of him, he's like a big time like entrepreneur right now, bodybuilder guy. He has great speeches, and he says one thing that I love. He goes, if you had to develop a perfect human with the perfect characteristics, what is the road you would have to build for them to get to that personality type, to those traits? It would be nothing but trials and tribulations to get to that point, that humbleness, understanding failure, right? Like all of these things are a huge part of the game.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of making it to the NHL. And I actually wanted to open up with this quote, and I think it's just kind of appropriate since we're still talking about preseason and training camp. And this is a quote by Emmett Smith. All men are created equal, so work harder in preseason. And I love that.
I love it.
Right. And it's like the idea is that, like, you're all on the same page, regardless of where you thought your ego is at. It's like this is the time to grind. It's the early part of the season is the time to grind and to really work through your troubles.
Especially if you're a bubble player.
Yes. I loved Ronnie Attard, he's got a really great attitude, and he scored a goal the other night. And I remember, I think it was the prior game, maybe 2 games prior to that, they asked him, like, or I forget who even asked him in an interview. They're like, oh, you're kind of a bubble guy, and you see all these other guys, how you doing? He's like, look, I know what I am. He's like, I've never been a highly touted prospect. Again, he was an overager in his draft. I think he was drafted at age 20. He's like, I've never been the guy who's top scout or anything like that. He's like, this is nothing. He's
but that motivates people.
Yeah, he's like, this changes nothing for me. He's like, I'm just putting my head down and working. And like, that is it. That's it. That's
what it is, right? They want to see if, let's say, a failure or some sort of disappointing situation like this can motivate them, and how they're going to respond to that. Yeah. And that's a big thing for Tortorella and the staff. And before we move on, actually, one last thing I wanted to mention about the preseason game here. Cam Atkinson got a goal. It was a nice play from Tippett to kind of give the puck to Frost. Frost tries to dump it, goes to Atkinson. He gets a nice backhander in there, but it's good to see Atkinson score one, and you can kind of see the relief on his face. How long has it been for him to score a goal? And when you're a goal scorer, you love to score goals. So it's just great to see Atkinson back. And him and Couturier, man, they've looked like themselves to me. They haven't really looked a step slow or a step behind.
I think Coots looks a little rusty offensively. I saw him fumble some pucks and whatnot, but that's to be expected. He hasn't played in 2 years.
You don't watch him and say these guys are completely different, like different players. Like they haven't dropped off of a cliff or anything in terms of their play, which is a great sign. So
look, and we talked about it. Remember when I hope people are listening. You guys remember when you were hearing everybody say, "Oh, are they going to start Couturier on the third line?" And Vasili and I were like, "What?" I was like, "He's the best player on the
former
team.
Selke winner."
Yeah, I was like, "He's playing first line." As you can see,
you just saw
never a hesitation.
Tortorella's press conference yesterday, right? He even said, he's seeing him get more involved offensively. He's making, some better offensive plays as the game go along. But Tortorella mentioned, and he made a point to mention that positionally, defensively, the small habits of his game, those have been there the whole time. Right? The guy, the timing aspect is what you need. And when you haven't played in 2 years, of course your timing will be off.
Right.
You're just, you haven't been in those situations for a lengthy period of time. It's natural. So
and that's why he's getting a bunch of preseason games. If he didn't come back from this, you probably wouldn't have seen Couturier play much at all, quite frankly, because he doesn't normally need it. They're not evaluating Couturier's competency.
He wants to play in these games. That's why he's getting the reps.
Well, he needs it. He's got to get in games. He's got to pick it.
But I'm sure he would tell you that. I'm sure he would tell you that, right?
He's a dominant player most of the time. It's going to take
controls the pace of the game, controls the flow of the game.
Yeah, exactly. It's just going to take a little bit for him to get back to where it was. And same with Atkinson. You're seeing, hints of it, right? But Atkinson is going to be better than what he's showing right now. It's going to take them a little bit longer. And even TK, you don't see TK, and he played his best game the other night, but you haven't seen TK doing what he was doing. This is what I talk about. It's hard for me to say TK is trying his hardest. I think he's still trying,
but he's not going balls to the wall like you see Brink or a Foerster or guys that are on the bubble to make the team. Yeah. And that's the difference between preseason and the regular season. And you'll see that once this starts off, you'll see those lineup regulars, get more into the sense of, okay, we're giving it our all, we're putting the effort in, all of that.
Absolutely. And I think if Laczynski had a better camp, I don't know if Foerster or Brink would be on the team, to be honest with you guys. For opening night lineup. I still will believe that both of them will be playing significant roles in the NHL for significant periods of time this year, but it just might not. Even Claude Giroux started off not making the team, going to the minors, struggling a little bit in the beginning, getting red hot in the AHL, coming to the NHL, and never looking back. And then eventually, by the end of his second season, was the Flyers' best player. So again, the way they start a season in their rookie year, it's almost irrelevant, to be honest. It's fun for Calder Trophy stuff, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter in the long run. It really does not. All right. So, and this is what I think I want to transition into this, and we don't have to sit too much about this, but there's a lot of call-up talk, and we just want to touch on this real quick. When we talk about call-ups in the NHL and people are like, oh, this will be the first call-up, it depends on who goes down, right? Yeah, the Flyers have several guys that they like, right? Adam Yinning has also been part of the conversation, right? If a defensive defenseman goes down, then Yinning is the guy. If an offensive defenseman goes down, Emil Andrae does both, but he's most likely the first call-up, right? Yeah. If he doesn't make the team, which I don't think he will at a camp, just a numbers game. And again, we'll talk about that. But a lot of this stuff depends on roles, right? And it depends on what they need. That's one of the reasons why I think Brink might win the job out, is because we don't have a lot of Brinks on the team. We do have a lot of
playmaking ability. So.
Right. But we do have a lot of shooters right now, right? And we do have a lot of kind of grinder players on the team. So Elliot Denoye, we lose Scott Lawton, we lose Ryan Poehling, we lose even Garrett Hathaway, right? Any of these guys who are playing PK roles and physical roles, a lot of these, you got to imagine what players are ready at the AHL level and what role are they going to jump into in the NHL. It's a role-based league, similar to football, not as much, but similar in some ways to football, where roles really matter. And your position and the style in which you play, a lot of times will justify what kind of player gets called up. If it's clear cut and this is the most dominant player for the minor league team, sure, right? But a lot of times, a few guys are doing well, not just one. So you got to figure out which one to call up. If I'm calling you up to be fourth line center, am I calling Bobby Brink up?
No, he's a right winger. So.
Exactly. So it's this stuff has to be included in the thought process.
No, 100%. And I think it's something to keep in mind.
The backup goalie thing.
Of course, it's something to keep in mind too when you think about top nine versus your fourth line. Let's say hypothetically Nicolas Deslauriers is out, and let's say Garnet Hathaway is out. Would they call up a Zayd Wisdom instead, maybe to replace one of those guys? Because
if Wisdom is lights out,
that's what I mean, right? They might think, okay, he's more physical, he's going to fit that fourth line role a little more. versus us, calling up Bobby Brink, for example, and putting him on the fourth line where he's going to get 8 minutes a night. Is that make more sense for him, or should he play top line on the Phantom's top power play?
Yeah.
So I think you have to factor it in, like, who are they replacing here? Like, let's say,
what do we have enough of at
yeah,
the
exactly.
NHL
Let's
level?
say, we'll go with Brink or Foerster because those are the hot topic guys here. But let's say like Travis Konechny gets hurt, for example, and one of those
Brink.
guys are in the minors, they're going to be coming up.
Yes.
Versus, like a Lickshall or a Desnoyers, for example, where I think if it's like a guy like Lawton who's playing, let's say if he's on a wing to start here, maybe they do give it to Lickshall, maybe they do give it to Desnoyers. We'll obviously see what occurs, but I think it just depends, right, on what it is. Like if you need a scoring player, you're going to bring up a guy who can score. If you need a checking player, you're going to bring up a guy that has a more checking acumen to his game, and that's kind of the skill set that he possesses. If you need to bring up a fourth line type player who's going to crash and bang, you're going to look for that guy in the AHL and who can plug in and isn't going to really miss a beat. You don't want to put a guy in a situation that he hasn't played in often because he's not going to be effective there.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. All right, so let's now I just want to go touch on this a little bit. We already talked about it already, but I have to say, especially with the way Sanheim has looked, thank God we did not make that trade for Torrey Krug, who's already injured, by the way.
Yeah,
I don't know if he's recovered quite yet.
So it looks like he should be ready to start the season, but you're missing training camp and it's a lingering injury. You really never know what's going to happen, especially
32 years old.
I was going to literally mention, especially defenseman of his age. Who knows how
Travis
it's going to play out.
27. And it's one of those things where, like, I got mocked for not liking the Ryan Ellis trade. Look, I didn't know he was going to get injured, but why didn't I like it? I'm like, okay, we're moving 2 young assets for an aging defenseman with a long contract. This Torrey Krug thing, in my mind, was the exact same thing. I'm like, that's not the type of trade I would try to make. It's a trade that comes from desperation. I didn't love it. I didn't love the trade. I don't know exactly what the details of it were. And I understood they could have got more. And, maybe that was a first round pick included there, right? I assume there probably was. But at the end of the day, like, you look at our defense right now, imagine it without Travis Sanheim and an aging Torrey Krug, who's also an undersized defenseman who's not even as good on defense as Travis Sanheim. He's better offensively, but again,
Flyers need help in the defensive
they were saved.
Aspect. So,
and I was talking to Jordan Hall about this in training camp on site, and he agreed with me. I was like, I think they got saved by not making that trade.
Yeah, I think long term it's a good thing for them, and it goes back to the asset management. Like Krug's 32 years old. He's likely on the decline, on the downside of his career. Unless he's going to play out the remainder of the years with the Flyers, first off, there's no guarantee he's going to continue at the level he has been because he's entering the backside of the career. Whereas you have Sanheim entering his prime, actually. So he's, based on his age, likely he's going to have the best seasons ahead of him here. So you're almost like swapping 2 guys at different points in their career. And if you're the Flyers, like, who would you be easier to move on from now, right? If you look at it, like, you're going to have a much easier time getting rid of Sanheim or trading him if you want to do that down the line in 1-2 years here versus Krug, who in 1-2 years is going to be 34 years old and might even be a shell of his former self at that point. So I think, if you want to get out from under the Sanheim contract down the line, this is the best move to make. And you might not even want to do that depending on how he plays here. And arguably, like, he's been the Flyers' best defenseman, I think, in this preseason when you've watched him. He's looked really good on the right side, transitioning up ice, like how he was in that season where he won the Barry Ashby. Very similar. Mm-hmm. And there's a chip on his shoulder. Like, I think he really wants to prove a lot of people wrong. And you could tell that he took it seriously because he gained a ton of weight this offseason, put on a lot of muscle, looks like a different Sanheim. And I think, he's using what happened to him this past offseason as a motivating factor for him.
Absolutely.
I can tell, right? It just looks like it.
Yeah, and those who are scared of his average cap hit per year, everybody should be aware, and we've talked about it multiple times, the cap is going to go up significantly, which means defensemen around the league are going to be paid more money, and his contract will no longer look like he's overpaid.
It'll be just about right, almost.
Exactly. I mean, quite frankly, he's really overpaid by maybe $1 million a year.
I think he's getting what, 6.25. I would say he should be like 5 million, 5.5. Like if you gave him the Risto contract, I don't think anybody would be
and look, the term is long,
outraged,
and it's a no trade clause, and I hate all no trade clauses. So I understand. Like, I think that's really what the motivation of the trade was more than anything, was to get
out from under the contract. Yeah.
Yes, because now look at Nick Delorier. He's a guy that maybe would get waived, and he can't be waived because he's got a no movement clause, right? I hate those things. So I think that's actually the biggest motivator. But his actual cap dollar hit is not so egregious that people are talking about it like, oh my God forbid.
Well, it's projected the cap's going to rise about 4 million, I think, next season,
and then again,
so like 8 million total in 2 years. Then you're basically getting back to paying, let's say, a number 3 defenseman, where most people think Sanheim is, about $6 million. So.
Think about how much easier it's going to be to trade a 29-year-old defenseman making exactly what he's supposed to be making, and if we improve his game, it's a lot easier to trade him. He'll have a no trade clause, but he can still you can still convince a guy to move and give him a trade list.
From an asset perspective, Yariv, I agree. Like, I think in hindsight, not making that trade is probably a benefit for the Flyers. I think if they would have made it, it would just limit them in the future on what they can do, because Krug is coming in at a big cap hit as well.
Yeah, he's also 6 something, right?
Something along those lines. Let me bring it up here and try to find it. But yeah, he's at a pretty big cap hit. He's even older. Yeah. And actually,
also has a no movement clause.
Considerably more. Well, not considerably more, but 250,000 more. So 6.5 million. And
also with the no trade clause.
Yeah, no move clause for the next 4 seasons. So it's like pretty similar.
I get it. I understand where people are coming from, but it just everybody's so desperate to remove people they were angry at last year. That is not smart asset management.
Well, you got to see how he bounces back. Usually, a guy who's had arguably the worst season of his career, he can go one of 2 ways. He's going to continue to trend downwards, or usually guys use that as a motivator, as I said, and they bounce back. And I mean, from what we've seen of Sanheim early on, it looks like he took it the other way. And, he's trying to have this be one of his best seasons of his career here. And I think with the usage he's going to get and the potential power play time, he has all the opportunity to blow his previous best seasons out of the water.
And prior to that, people were screaming to get rid of Ristolainen. I don't hear anybody saying that anymore. In fact, imagine this defense without Risto and how undersized.
He's played really well, to be honest, in the preseason so far. Very solid, and that's what you want from him. When you don't notice Ristolainen, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and we don't really have any other defensemen like him.
Physicality-wise, yeah.
And that can actually move the puck and play with better players. So while we did trade too much to get him, and I understand why people are upset, like, don't hold that against the player every single time.
Yeah.
You got to let go of that stuff. You got to remove your personal biases from these guys. Just like kind of the theme of this episode, and I'll ask it right now, like, is this team really going to be as bad as everybody thinks? There's no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee that we're going to be a bottom of the league team.
I personally the Flyers, in most projections, most pundits have them as a bottom 5 team. From what I'm seeing, they
don't look like that.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be a bottom 5 team. Are they going to make the play? Are they going to make the playoffs? Who knows, right? I think that they will still be on the outside looking in there, to be honest, and that's likely just due to the defensive makeup. I personally just don't think their defense, when you look at it on paper, is that strong. You never know how certain guys are going to elevate their games, like a Sanheim, like some of the younger defensemen, like a Zamula, like a Andrae, potentially, right? They could come in. Yeah, York as well. They could come in and be, York could look like a bona fide top pair guy this season. He did last year. Andrae and Zamula could look like top 4 options, and if that's the case, the defense, there's less question marks surrounding them, and then I would have to change my thought process. But until I see them in those scenarios, it's hard to project, right? But I think they'll be on the bubble, to be honest, of challenging for a playoff spot, and they'll be competitive, much more competitive than what teams are thinking or pundits are thinking. So,
dude, that's what we've been saying the entire offseason.
Pretty much,
barring health, this team will probably be a bubble team. If health is an issue, then they're
going to be pretty bad.
And that happened to them last year. They weren't actually one of the worst teams in the league. They had a ridiculous amount of injuries. Then they dropped, and then they worked their way back up to the point where we were drafting 7th. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like it was just bad out of 32 teams, but they had games where they were a frustrating team to play against, especially against considering they were an awful team record-wise. They weren't that bad. They weren't getting blown out of games. They're a hair from being a bubble team at one point. So barring health concerns and the fact that this is a young team, I mean, what I took away from that Boston game is not that they have enough talent to beat any team in the league or anything like that, but if they play with that type of precision
and the structure,
that type of structure, the execution out of their own zone, the fact that the power play looks better, all of a sudden you're not talking about a bottom of the league team. You're talking about a playoff bubble team, right?
Exactly. And I mean, if you have Carter Hart, for example, take the next step here, and he looks like a bona fide elite goaltender.
With Sam Ersson behind him.
That's the thing, right? Goaltending is a huge factor, and I think the Flyers have a really potential good 1-2 punch, whether it's Hart or Ersson or whether it's Hart or Sandstrom. I think they have strong goalies, and sometimes that's all you need to win in a certain matchup, right? Your goaltender plays really well for you. Like, look at I always say, go back to those New York Rangers teams, right? With Henrik Lundqvist, there was numerous nights where they were winning games that they should not have because of their goalies, and I think the Flyers could be in a similar position with Hart. So
yeah, absolutely. And I was just watching a breakdown of the new NHL 24 ratings.
Hart's top 10.
Yeah, and he has an 87 with elite potential. For those who don't play NHL, that's really good, especially for a goaltender of his age. We talked about Shesterkin and the fact that Shesterkin is 3 to 4 years older than Hart, 3 years older than Hart. And the guy who runs that YouTube was like, "Oh, Hart's slightly overrated." I'm like, "No, he's not." Immediately, I was like, "No, he's not." In fact, I would say he's underrated.
Well, if anything, I mean, he's underrated just because of the team that played in front of him last season, right? Usually, you have a bad team in front of you. What suffers? That's your goals against average and your save percentage numbers. Those were not very good. They're not in the top 10 of the league, and thus you're not getting the national recognition of being one of those top goalies. I wrote an article today for Daily Faceoff going through underrated goalies. Hart was one of my underrated goalies, by no surprise to anybody who listens to this podcast, because I talk about it all the time. He just does not get the recognition.
John Gibson,
John Gibson too.
Anaheim.
Yeah, exactly. But Hart, right? If you look at a different metric, which is goals saved above expected, and what that kind of calculates is, let's say if you're a goaltender and there's a certain amount of expected goals that should go in against you, how many are you saving versus what you actually let in? So Hart this past season, he had a really good goals saved above expected rating, and he was 15th in the league, actually. And if you look at, the Flyers team in front of him last year, they were not very good. And for him to put that up,
they were a disaster.
Yeah, they were one of the worst teams in the league defensively last year. So it just shows, right, that a lot of the time with goaltenders, it's a product of what's in front of you. And if that product in front of you isn't good, usually you're going to suffer as a goalie in terms of your numbers, the recognition that you're getting, and everything, essentially.
Yeah, and for those who watch football, and I'm not an expert on football at all, but if you have a quarterback with a terrible offensive line and no good receivers, how good is that quarterback going to be?
Well, yeah, if nobody can catch the ball, you're not going to get many touchdowns.
And you don't have the time to get a throw off, right?
Exactly.
And you're constantly being blitzed or pressured. If you have a great quarterback, your main goal is to build up your offensive line and give him time, right?
You can argue
that equally.
You could argue that's what happened to Hart last season, right? Like, he started off the first 10 games and he had the best stats in the whole league amongst goaltenders. And then as, the games wear on, as the season wears on, there's only so long you can keep that up when you're getting hemmed in your zone defensively every night and you're letting up, so many shots against. Like, the Flyers defense score last year, they let up 31.5 shots a game. So when you're having that kind of come up against you every single night, you're not going to be having the best statistical nights every game. So,
and that's what I loved about that game against Boston. Boston could not get a shot on net.
Yeah.
I recognize they're outgunned. We mentioned that already. That is not the Boston Bruins we will be playing in the regular season.
But limiting shots is important.
But even so, right? Exactly. They were
getting into that habit, right?
Yeah, they were getting in front of pucks at all time. They were killing second opportunities. This is the stuff that makes your goaltender look better.
Oh yeah,
It's a big part of it.
definitely. And Hart, he had a 10.3 goal saved above expected rating last year, and that's in 15.5 games. So like he's in the top echelon in that stat, but you don't ever really see that getting brought up. It's always a save percentage, always the goals against
You
average.
you will not find a pundit or like a commentator at the high levels, like a Boucher, a Kevin Weeks, who talks down on Carter Hart. Like you
No,
just
exactly.
don't see it.
It's usually the other media that isn't as in tune with the goaltenders. But two former goalies, it doesn't surprise me that they
You just
love
watch him
Hart's
play.
games and his technicality. Well, he's just so efficient in all of his movements. Like
Yes.
he makes hard saves look very easy.
Yes.
So
Yes. And he stopped that 2-on-0
oh my
the
god,
other
yeah,
night in the only game that he's gotten to play so far. And it's like you don't stop 2-on-0s.
pretty
Those are
much
like
as a goaltender.
that's like 95% chance it's going in the net. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So he's a special player. And I do think this team has the ability to be better than people think. I really
yeah.
do.
I think he's a big factor in that. To be honest,
Yes.
like he's getting
Him,
into that prime
Coots,
category right now. So
the face-offs, the fact that we'll probably be a much better PK team. It looks like we have opportunity to at least be better than the worst power play team in the league. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like if we can even get into that top 20 range, like all of these things will incrementally move us into a
The
point
special
where we're a
teams
bubble team.
Special teams are a big thing. We talk about that all the time on this podcast. That
Yes.
if you look at all the playoff teams from last season, generally they're all within the top 20 of the league in special teams, and that's PK power play. If you're a bottom of the league in special teams, that's going to sink you in majority of games because that's
Yeah.
where that's sometimes where you need to be bailed out, right? If you're not having that great 5-on-5 night, your power play can lift you up. If you're, allowing a lot of goals on the penalty kill, how is that going to affect you when you go back to 5-on-5? It takes the wind out of your sails as a team, right?
Yeah.
So
And just another example of how uninformed a lot of people who talk about the NHL, which is very difficult to cover, right? We cover one team. We're not covering the whole league. But when the Flyers traded for Cal Petersen, and everybody goes, "Oh, does this mean Carter Hart's out the door?" This is why I don't. This is why I make fun of all that stuff because
yeah,
it's like it's such a loss of attention to detail that I'm just like, oh, okay. I mean,
time to trade a 23-year-old goalie with elite potential for a guy that just played in the AHL last season. Sounds
yeah,
like a
yeah.
great way to manage your
Right on.
assets.
We'll get right on that. He couldn't even beat out Ersson and Sandstrom.
Yeah,
And you guys think that he's going to beat out the who has been called by the GM and the head coach our clear-cut starting goaltender.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
laughable to me.
Yeah, I don't know how things degrade so quickly to that point. All right, let's get into the next thing. So the Phantoms are in action as we record this. They're currently kind of getting their butt kicked. They're down 2-0 to Wilkes-Barre Scranton. But I will say this: I'm gonna read out the lineup which Bob Rochuk tweeted out earlier today. We got Garrett Wilson, Elliot Denoye, and Zayd Wisdom as the top line. Alexis Gendron, Bolivia, I forget his first name right now. I don't even know half of these guys. Olsen on the right, Pole and Jacob Gauthier in the middle. Adam Kelly, he's pretty much an ECHL, AHL guy. Chizowski, I've never heard of him. Stellar, Polini. These are all ECHL players. That's their forwards. Then the defense is Mason Millman, who was in ECHL last year. Helge Grans on the right-hand side. Will Smolik with Ethan Sansom. Adam Karishik. And then Brady, who I don't know who that is either. These guys are all ECHL or invites or guys who are trying to make kind of that next level. Parker Gahagan is playing the first half, and then Nolan Mayer will be playing the second half, who's the more premier goaltender of the two, a guy who will most likely be third string at the AHL level. He's not a bad goaltender in his own right, and he's actually pretty young. But you can see that is a very sparse lineup. That is not the way the Phantoms are going to be looking. A lot of the elite top players are clearly not in the lineup there. So I would not be looking at this game as a testament of what this team will look like.
Yeah, they're just beginning their training camp preseason, so it makes
Right.
sense. You're going to start off some guys that okay, who potentially do we see that might have a chance to make the team from that lower level in the ECHL, right?
Again, you saw at the NHL level, right, where you see Brendan Fury playing top line, at one point. It's like this stuff is really not, like Wisdom's been really good. He could play top line this year at times. It is possible just because he's a power forward type. But him, Denoye,
This is the time,
and Garrett Wilson, that's normally like your third line.
yeah, this is the time though to try things, right? That's what
First preseason game.
That's what preseason and training camp is for, right? Like coaches want to see certain guys in certain situations. This is the time to do it when it doesn't count. So I don't blame LaPerriere for kind of just looking at things and saying, okay, let's see what this all looks like tonight, and let's see what it looks like in a different kind of setup in the next game, right? That's what it's all about. So
absolutely. And but I do think, and we'll go through the depth chart next. I do think the Phantoms could be very good this year.
Yeah.
Like better than last year, with more scoring punch, with more goaltending depth, with more defensive depth. Again, I do believe Emil Andrae will start off in the AHL. I could be wrong, but we'll look at the lineup, and I don't know how you waive Igor Zamula, especially the way he's playing.
He's played well,
the way he's playing with Sanheim.
I'd like to see that player.
Yeah, that is a definite. That guy's getting taken waivers, in my opinion, and some team is absolutely plugging him into their at least top 7 around the NHL. So that's why I don't believe Emil Andrae will start in the NHL. That's why.
Yeah,
because they're not waiving Sealer because he's another guy who would probably get taken. They could waive Sean Walker, but he also could be taken. Potentially. But I think they're going to look to move on from guys like Sealer and Walker and Stahl.
Well, you have to factor in
at the end of the season.
This is all the asset management we were talking about, Yariv. Like, okay, sure, Andrae, you know what? He's played really well. To be honest, he probably has earned a spot. Just if you look at his play.
Yes.
Great outlet passes, great transition passes. In that game against Boston, Boston, he had some really nice interceptions and steals. Then he transitions the puck up the ice so quickly, and the Flyers are getting scoring opportunities due to that. Like, that's something in their game that's been missing the last couple of years, and I'm sure Tortorella sees that and says, hey, we could use this season.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
But like, the Flyers are still rebuilding here. We can't get ahead of ourselves, and they're going to want to use guys like Stahl, like Sealer, like Walker to gain draft capital, and they'll be able to move them at the trade deadline for draft picks.
Sealer.
Exactly.
Sealer's an easy one to move. He's under 30 and he makes nothing.
And if you lose those guys for nothing, let's say, you're only hurting yourself in the future because you're not going to be able to get those draft picks you can add. And sometimes it just takes one of those picks in a later round, and you can find a diamond in the rough, and it turns out to be very lucrative for you. So I don't think that's something the Flyers are trying to miss out on here, even though Andrae probably has earned a spot.
Yeah. So. And if Tortorella is really into the rebuilding, that means taking care of your assets. That means not rushing young players. And, Andrae, I will agree with you. He looks pro ready.
He's played at the pro level in the past.
Right. So. But what is the harm in allowing him to play 10, 15 games in the minors, letting him play in all situations, 25 minutes a night, where in the NHL, he's going to play less minutes, right? He's going to play, 15 to 18 minutes a night if he's good.
Not top power play.
Right, not top power play. Maybe, but he's not going to get any of that time. And you can see, even from preseason, he's still adjusting to the NHL game versus the Swedish game to some degree. Give him 10 games in the minors. Give him 15 games and see if you can move out one of your veterans. Right? Well, or if they get injured.
That's what I mean, right? Like, you can always wait for an injury to pop up. It's the NHL.
Will happen.
One will happen at some point here. But also, he only played about 10 games with the Phantoms last year. He's only been in 3 or 4 preseason games to start. Like, that means he's only really technically played 14 games in North American ice versus international ice. That's what I mean. So there still is some adjustment there, 100%, because you're literally moving a guy from a rink size that he was comfortable playing with his whole life to something that he's not been. So, like, if you don't think that there's instincts there from the Swedish game that will translate over here, like, that's 100% valid. And, like, it's going to take time for that to be worked out of the game. So,
yeah. And again, if the Flyers were barren on the back end and Zamula wasn't here,
then of course you started,
and Walker wasn't here and Sealer weren't here, then I'd be like, okay, there's no risk because he's going to be definitely part of the top 6. And it's not a question.
You don't want to sit him.
Yeah, and I saw people talking about like, oh, why would the Flyers keep Stahl? Yeah, they're gonna bring in Stahl for mentorship and then drop him, and then waive him and drop him. First of all, if you waive Stahl, he's probably getting taken
100%.
because he's $1 million a year for a guy who's can definitely be your number 7 defenseman, even if you're a playoff team. He was top 4 for a playoff team
For a
last
Stanley
year.
Cup team, what do you mean?
Yeah, there's a reason he's not being tested over and over again in preseason. It's not that they're not interested in him. Tortorella already knows Stahl. Like he's not like
he knows what he's going to get from Stahl.
He's not trying to figure it out. And again, people get really excited with the young guys, and I get it. I love them too. But I've already learned this over the years. There's no reason to rush any of these young guys. There's no reason to lose any assets. And there's a reason why these old hockey men make these decisions is because they're wise to make these decisions. Sometimes they're wrong, right? But it's a lot better than losing your assets. It's better that you just look at the AHL and be like, yo, Emil Andrae is killing it down there. We got to move a guy out of here.
He earned a spot, exactly.
It's not even that. It's like, there's no point to hold him back. He's too good for the AHL, right?
That might happen, but until it does, right? Wait until that point. I think.
And again, opening night rosters do not matter. They do not matter. That it is nonsense. Who cares? First of all, this isn't football where you only have 16 games, and if you go down 0-3, the likelihood of you making the playoffs is 0. Like the first 20 games of the season are a crapshoot. Most teams are kind of still trying to figure it out, and then you see after those first 20 games, which I don't even really believe anyway, but after those first 20 games, you kind of, teams start separating themselves from the pack. Flyers started off, 7-2-1 last year?
Well, then that's what I mean, right? And look how they finished. Like, for me, I'm the same way. Like, you need to see 20 games from a team to really understand what they could be and what they are. Until that point, exactly. At the minimum. Games.
So yeah, I think it's best. Again, I don't know. I could be wrong. Andrae could make the team. They could waive Walker. I don't see it happening. But, they could do that stuff. It's not an impossibility. But just because people are excited about somebody from preseason doesn't mean that's the way the organization is thinking about it, because they're looking at not just the beginning of the season. They're looking at all season long. And a lot of these guys have never played an 82-game season in the NHL. And it is a grind, more of a grind than the AHL. Again, if the AHL is arguably the second best league in the world, I would say it's still a little bit behind the KHL. But, if it's arguably that, okay, then it's good enough for them to develop in. You know what I'm saying? It's the closest thing you can give them, more risk-free. And I personally would rather see Emil Andrae playing a bunch in the beginning of the year, getting adjusted, giving him all situations, just like Cam York had, right? All situation play.
For his development.
Be the backbone of the Phantoms, which he will be. I have zero doubts.
He'll be their top defenseman if he starts there. So
yeah, playing with Helge Grans. You know what I mean?
He's had chemistry with, which is a good thing as well for even Grans. So
and even Ronnie Attard, he's waiver exempt. You know what I mean? Great, we can keep developing you. That's a luxury. There's a reason waiver exemption exists. It's not for the players. The waivers are for the players. Waivers are for players to stop being buried. It's for Tanner Laczynski, who's been trying to make an NHL lineup.
Get an opportunity.
And now a team, or even Sandstrom, get an opportunity to be like, no, we want you over here and we're going to play you in the NHL. That's why you have to play them in the NHL.
Exactly.
You can't just bury them in the minors. If you do it again, they go through waivers again, and another team could take them. Right? That's the benefit for them. The benefit for ownership and for the general manager is that they have the waiver exemption and they can take their time with their assets. So why would you not leverage that if you can?
Why act like you're pushed up against the wall here when you're technically not?
Yes.
So
everything is about leverage. Everything's about leverage. Is why I hate rumors, because it ruins leverage.
It's a great point.
It ruins leverage for your team. Like, that's why we don't talk about them on here. I don't want to add to that. I'd rather get the most, look at the Sixers with James Harden. What an idiot. You want to get traded? Keep your mouth shut, play well, and then trading you is easy. If you're complaining publicly and saying you won't show up to camp, the Sixers now have no choice but to move you, and they're in a position where they can only get ripped off.
Well, yeah, because every other team knows that he's not showing up. So
what are they going to do now? How are they going to get the value that they wanted for a guy who's a former MVP candidate?
Well, you're not.
The guy they gave up two first-round picks. Exactly. They can't now. They could have got something for him. The same thing with Ben Simmons. It's like all these guys, people want hockey to be more like basketball. No, thank you. I don't want those attitudes here. Act professional. Keep your mouth shut. Play. Talk. If you want to leave, don't talk to the media about it. Talk to the team. Say, I will go out there. I will play. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm going to be a professional.
But you got to trade me.
Get me out of here.
Yeah.
Let your agent handle that stuff. Do it behind closed doors. It'll get you out quicker, right?
Yep, definitely.
All right, let's go to our last segment. And this is the fun part. I'm going to do a screen share. For those of you who are listening in the audio version, you can go to YouTube to follow along on this. I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to go through a little bit of the depth chart. This isn't very accurate. I threw this together earlier today. Didn't really have time to do a full accurate one, but I just thought it'd be interesting to look at. So I'm on Cap Friendly, this GM kind of armchair GM mode here is always fun. I'm kind of looking at we'll start at the NHL level. And again, I kind of made decisions already based off our conversations of who I think are going to make it.
Yeah.
Emil Andrae will, will not be on this list, though I could be wrong, or we could be 100% wrong. But you look at the forward lines there, I'm kind of going off of what we've had already. I don't know if Farabee is going to be the top line left winger. I think there's a good chance that he will be.
I think so too.
Yeah, obviously there's chemistry with Morgan Frost there. Cam Atkinson could be that guy in the second line. It also, it could end up being Bobby Brink, right? For now, I have Tyson Foerster in there. The one thing we want to remember, it's how they finish. There's still one more game here. Foerster has not played poorly. He has everything behind him. But look, there is a scenario here where Wade Allison makes the team too. I think they have a luxury to keep Allison as the 13th forward. I think that's why you go with one of the young guys. That's what you see here, right? And
definitely.
Go ahead, please.
I'm just looking at it. I think you're pretty spot on. I think they're going to start Farabee and Couturier together, like in that shortened season in the bubble. Like they had really great chemistry. That was Farabee's best season, and Farabee's looked like the prior version of himself before the back injury here in this preseason. So I think they're going to want him to play with Coots and have him start hot. So I think they'll have this top line. The second line, I do envision them keeping Frost and Tippett together to start. I mean, they have really good chemistry together. We saw that last season, so why wouldn't you use that to your advantage?
This is what we had pretty much as in all off season. I'm sorry to cut you off, except for Noah Cates being the third line center rather than second line center.
Yeah, but it looks like Frost, they're going to give him some more offensive opportunities here, which I like because that's what you're going to need. But that's what you're going to need from him. And I mean, to be real, he likely is going to produce more offense in those situations than a Cates would. Like if you're going to give a Noah Cates an offensive zone starter or a Morgan Frost, who's likelier to come out with, production from that? And it's probably a Frost, right? Just based on the skill set, where now you have Cates as a third line center and you can kind of use him almost as that checking shutdown center,
which is typically what the third line is. I'm sorry to cut you off, but yeah.
Yeah, so I like it, and I think it's pretty spot on. Like if they're looking to keep that fourth line together, if they don't, want to drop, let's say, a Nicolas Deslauriers to the 13th forward, then I would envision that it's going to be
I think could happen at times this year.
That's what I mean.
Nobody's talking about it, but nobody ever says Nick Deslauriers has to play every game during the season.
That's what I mean. So we'll see how that goes. Like I think for now they're going to start off with that fourth line. I think Tortorella really likes it. They played really well. They've played.
And they want to be physical.
Yeah, they played the game that they wanted them to. So until they start underwhelming in terms of their play and their performance, like let's say they have some games in a row where the fourth line just really getting hemmed in or not playing well, maybe you see a change up, right? Because it's all about what's happening in the moment. But I think for now they're going to start off like that. So I really do think it's going to be that third right winger role where it's going to be Brink or Foerster. If you're just looking, off the merit of preseason, it would be Bobby Brink in my opinion. He's had a better performance. He's played better, but it's not all preseason that factors into what's going on here, right? Like Foerster in the past played really well in the NHL. He shows that he has a very plus shot, can beat goalies from essentially anywhere. Yeah, can beat goalies from anywhere on the ice. So, like, is that something you would want missing out of your lineup? Brink brings a different element, though. He has more of the playmaking factor where you might want that.
It
So
does balance out that third line a little bit more too, though, with adding some playmaking to
it
Kate
does.
and Scott Lawton, and that's the one thing where I see maybe there's a benefit there.
So we'll see. We'll see with Brink and Foerster what happens. Like at this point, I think I wouldn't be surprised if it's either of them. But I think I would have Brink with a slight edge just based on his play right now. But let's say Foerster has a big 2-goal game in the last game, and I think he's penciled right in there, to be
Yeah,
honest, no matter what Brink does. And then you look at the defense, and this is kind of what we talked about all season. Like, who knows how it's going to shake out, but for them to potentially lose Igor Zamula, who's looked like a bona fide top 4 option to me playing with Sanheim next to him, like, I just think, why
I
would
don't
you
think
do
it's gonna
that?
happen.
Yeah, why would you do that? And why would you force Andrae into the lineup and lose a player for nothing, essentially, when you can just bring Andrae up if there's an injury, which there will be because it's hockey. So I just think this is like very close to what we'll see here as the starting lineup. I wonder what happens on the bottom pair, though. Like, I can't see them scratching Sealer.
I was I was torn here.
So I think Walker gets scratched, to be honest, to start off.
It's definitely possible. The only reason I had Walker here is that he's a natural righty, but
Yeah.
that doesn't obviously mean he's going to. He's just a right-handed defender, and I assume that Mark Stahl will start the season in the opening night lineup, but that might not be the case as we move forward.
Well,
but I do agree with you. They love Sealer, and quite frankly, he's played really well in camp.
he has, yeah, and they've even said, like, Tortorella even said, like, Stahl's not going to get every single game this year, right? It's going to be a rotation. So, like, I would envision that you'll probably see, like, a Stahl, Walker, maybe rotate a bit. Let's say some of the younger defensemen don't impress. Like, let's say Zamula has a real bad game, for example. Maybe then you see all 3 of those vets in one night and you see a guy sit. Like, who knows? But you have flexibility. Yeah. But I think Andrae will get his games. He'll get his reps this season for sure, even though he doesn't start. And to be quite frank, like, if they didn't have one of Stahl, Walker, Sealer, let's say one of them was off the roster, I think Andre's in the lineup, and then you have one of those guys as the 7th. And maybe as the season goes along, one of them gets traded, and they make room for Andrae if he's really just killing it at the AHL level.
Yeah, I mean, they could waive Sean Walker, right?
Yeah, possible.
They could, like, I don't believe that they will waive Nick Sealer because he will get taken.
He'll get claimed. Walker will not at that cap hit, though.
Yeah. And there is a chance that he could get waived. I honestly don't see it just because he's been a serviceable defenseman and he's played well in preseason, but it's absolutely possible. And again, Andre's played well. He has earned, he has shown that he's a pro player.
And
that's why I don't get too excited about opening night rosters.
And to add in, I mean, I think for Andrae, he has the benefit of Briere and Flair really being in his corner, and they're the ultimate decision makers here at the end of the day. So
100%.
Who knows how it's going to shake out? And then we get into the final battle.
But let me bring this up. There's a reason that they talk to his SHL team about him potentially going down to the minors, right?
They knew
that they might start the season like this anyway, regardless of if he was ready or not. And again, it's about asset management. Now that they can move him, right? Now that they can move him to the minors, they have that luxury to wait out the beginning of the season. For all we know, one of these guys on defense or offense could get hurt next game. God forbid, but it could happen, and then conversations change anyway. And then, you look at Avon, who got injured, right? He didn't even get to show himself, really. I'm not saying he would have made the team, but that changes things for the Phantoms, right? He's the center or a left, and we'll go through the Phantoms after this, and that I have no idea what those lines will be. That is, I was trying to look at it. I'm like, there's too many guys here that are good.
I think for now we're pretty accurate in what it'll look like, but let's say hypothetically, the Flyers start off and they don't look too good, then I think we see the lineup change. Like, I think Tortorella definitely wants to try tip it with Couturier at some point this season, and we've talked about the potential of that combination being, interesting to watch. So I think we'll see. Lines never stay the same, but I think this is pretty close to what we're going to see to start the year, and then from there we'll move on. The final battle is obviously the goaltending, and we kind of went in depth earlier, so we're not going to get too crazy with it.
I just have it ranked by,
but I think
status within, how we see who's better.
Yeah, I think Ersson is the more talented goalie, obviously just based on, everything that we know so far.
And he got an
well,
extension.
yeah, and he got an extension. And to be honest,
But
he
it's his
probably,
last year of waiver exemption too.
yeah, he's probably been the second best goalie in camp just based on play. Like, I think it's been pretty accurate that, it's been Ersson and Hart have been probably the best in terms of their play. And then Sandstrom's closely behind them. And then you have Petersen. I think Sandstrom will get the backup role just due to not being waivers exempt. They probably just don't want to lose him. And then Ersson will get the starting role probably with the Phantoms. But it could be vice versa, right? We know Tortorella really likes Ersson, so that could have a factor.
If they think that they can waive Sandstrom and he won't get taken, or they're okay with him getting taken, which is possible too, that might happen anyway, right? And they might be like, well, we'll just go with Petersen as the starter. But if Petersen gets injured, then you have Nolan Myers, your starting goaltender in the minors.
Which isn't the greatest.
Right, exactly. And now you're hampering a team that you're building to win a Calder Cup, right? So I don't know. I can say what I would do. I can't say what Briere will do, and I haven't even seen him be GM long enough. But it's just not a risk I would take, especially with the Hockey Canada thing looming over everything, which could, disrupt things even more, and then you're doubly screwed because things were taken out of your hands. And we don't even know if Carter Hart's involved. For all I know, he's not involved because he said he wasn't.
From an asset manager perspective, I just think it makes sense to keep Sandstrom, and then down the line, if you want to get Ersson games, or let's say Sandstrom plays really well, as a backup, you might even be able to trade him at the deadline for something and get even more assets for yourself. So I just think it doesn't behoove the Flyers to get rid of him right now, because I don't think you could trade him right now actively for anything more than like a fifth, sixth round pick. So
I don't even know if you could for a pick at all.
Yeah.
But if you're getting a goaltender that makes bare minimum in the league and it's literally zero risk in your Tampa Bay, for instance, that just lost Vasilevsky, you need a backup.
Why wouldn't they claim him?
Right, exactly. And I'm not saying they will. There might be other goaltenders, right? Maybe the Flyers know that there's going to be a slew of goaltenders and a handful of them are better than Sandstrom. And they're like, well, the likelihood that they go for Sandstrom and not these other 5 guys that we have ranked above him, let's just go for the risk. It'll be all right. That can happen. Absolutely. I'm not saying Sandstrom is the guy. It's just we're talking about asset management and we keep repeating ourselves, but I think it needs to be said. Yeah. Because when I hear people talk, especially on Twitter, it's like not even a thought in their mind.
If you look at the gap in just performance, like Ersson's been good, sure. But it's not like he's been like lights out better than Sandstrom or anything.
Right. So Sandstrom's also played well in the time that he's played. And I imagine I don't know what the lineup will be for the last game, but I could see Sandstrom opening that game potentially. Yeah. And getting, half of the time with
I think Carter they'll split both. It would make sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, they didn't give him a full game, which might mean that they're not that interested, and that's like Tortorella's thing, right? But at the end of the day, I don't know. Even if when you listen, I think it was Charlie O'Connor that asked him this question about this exact situation. And at first, Tortorella was like, well, I don't really, that's not my thing. Like, I just pick the best players. But then he went on to go, but like, look, I'm not a waivers guy. That is the GM's role, right? He's making it very clear that
he said, I have to listen to my GM, literally in that quote.
I mean, he doesn't have a choice. It's his boss. He tells the GM who the best players are, and the GM looks at the team and goes, okay, well, can you deal without him for a little bit? Can Sandstrom fit the bill for the first 10, 15 games? Let's find out if he really is, and if he plays 3 or 4 or 5 games in the regular season, he just doesn't have it, then we're going to waive him. And you know what? At that point, nobody's going to take him, right? Because if his performance goes down, then he's our backup in the minors, right? And that's it. And it's his last chance with the Flyers, or he does get taken, but the Flyers have decided no, and they'll maybe pick up somebody else through waivers, or they'll go with Nolan Meyer, or they'll bring in another guy, like, another vet, to be behind Petersen. Who knows? It's the minors, right? You're not looking for NHL star goalies here, right? Yeah. But you want to be certain. That's all I'm saying. You want to be certain that you're going to make a decision like this with any of the guys you waive. And even Laczynski, they didn't play him a ton, but they did hold him out longer than people expected. And now he's gone. They gave him till bare minimum. He didn't show enough in these games. His role is not defined at the NHL level. And right now, Wade Allison's on that bubble, and I don't think Wade Allison gets waived, personally. That's why I don't see both guys make, and that's why they keep bringing that up to Torts, and he can be, upset about that. But we all kind of see it as like Wade Allison is like, you don't just throw away Wade Allison without
He's your
giving him a little
13th
bit of time.
forward, I think.
Right,
Sure.
exactly.
So.
And he's good to have as a 13th forward, right? And you don't want to lose him for nothing, and a guy who you do have some value for at this point, a guy that you were higher on earlier in his career, right? That was set back by injuries and, some other things that, I can guess on, but I really don't know. All right. And then let's look at the Phantoms here. And this is just a goddamn, like, I have no freaking idea what's going to happen here. You look at the left side, like Rhett Gardner is most likely a left wing at this level, right? But you look at that left side with Lixell. I didn't even know how to group this, to be honest with you. With Lixell and Brown and Wilson and Rhett Gardner and Brendan Fury. All those guys are starters at the AHL level, right?
Yeah, I guess you got to remove Gendron. He'll be going back to juniors here.
Is that confirmed?
Yeah, it's confirmed. So he'll be playing in junior just to the CHL rules. So, yeah.
Well, but he's still with the team.
They're going to send him back eventually, though. He'll be there for camp.
Because you can be 19 in the minors.
Yeah, but it's just his birthday's late, I think. So that's the reason.
So that might be the case there. That'll open up some spot. But we saw that there are other players involved here too. But again, what the lineups will be down there, I have no idea. Laczynski, if he clears waivers, I think he will be most likely top line center. Maybe it'll be Adam Brooks or something like that. Brooks played really well last year. Denoyer could be the top line center. Avon is still injured, so I don't really know. Tuamala will be in the mix for top six. Maruti will be in there. Sade Wisdom will be in there. I don't know what's going to happen with Gendron. And again, there's the other mix of guys, and I'm not even, obviously I didn't bring up Foerster or Brink that could be part of this mix as well. So they do have a large amount of assets there without even the AHL contract guys mixed in, like Jacob Gauthier, Belleve, who else? Garrett Wilson's kind of the veteran there, but there's other guys, Killy, right? These guys are like trying out for the team, and a lot of times they do kind of get rotated in. I have no idea what these lines are going to be right now. The defense, even more complicated. I assume Emil Andrae will start down here. Maybe he'll start. The Flyers will go 8 defensemen. That is also possible to start the season. But I would assume it would be Andrae and Helge Grans as the top pairing. Yinning and Ronnie Attard have been kind of playing together, pretty consistently. It's a big, second pairing. They're also potential call-ups. Belpedio is a big part of the Phantoms, and Victor Mete is an NHL caliber defenseman, or at least bubble guy. Will Smolik's been getting time. Ethan Sansom is the guy they want to look at, and we know Mason Millman is a guy who's also in that mix, and then Adam Karashak, and then there's gonna be other guys in that mix there. The goaltending is and I just look at this and I'm like, man, there's a lot of guys.
I'm not sure what's gonna happen. I mean, like, I think for the defense, it's probably more murky than the forwards. Like, I'd imagine it's gonna be Andrae and Grans as like a top pair, essentially, if he starts there, and then Adam, Ginning, and Ronnie Attard is pretty accurate. And from that point, I just don't know, because like Belpedio's a mainstay, Mete is going to play, and then like what are you going to do with Samson and Smolek? I'm assuming they're going to want Samson to play. They want to try to develop him. Smolek they signed for a reason. You might have Millman back to the ECHL, unfortunately, due to all that. It sucks to see, but there's a numbers game.
Could be Smolek too.
Could be Wolok too, yeah. I don't know about Karashik. If he could be ECHL bound, I think he's more of an AHL veteran, so they might want to keep him around as well.
Exactly. There's a lot of names.
And then the forwards, like, I would imagine Desnoyers is going to be your top line center here, even over Laczynski, just due to development reasons. Like,
sure, but he wasn't last year.
I know, it's true. So we'll see how they kind of play him, but that's where I would have him personally. If I was making the lineup, I'd put him in the top
Avon
line
is maybe the best skater of this group.
Yeah,
he's injured, so I'm kind of like
Tuamala too, man. I think he had a really good camp. He really opened some eyes. Like, he could be a call-up option at some point this year, potentially. Don't rule that out, especially if he has a good start to the season here. Like, Tortorella really liked him. He mentioned
I really liked him.
I liked him too, but I mean, like, to have the head coach mention a guy like that numerous times, I think that's telling, right? In terms of like what
I
they
hope he
ultimately
does.
think
I
of
hope he
him.
does play at least top six. And
Very
I assume
speedy.
that he will. And if Gendron is gone, right, which I'm assuming you're right there, right? Then you don't really even have that competition with Gendron
Yeah,
anymore,
he's not
right?
age eligible. Like he'll be age eligible starting next year.
So is
So
he
what?
still 18? Did I look up his age wrong?
No, he's not 18, but it's like CHL rules. So like 19-year-olds,
What's
based
the
on a certain,
cutoff? Do you know the cutoff?
I don't know the cutoff date, but based on a certain
Should
date
have
of your
looked it up.
whenever your birthday is,
Yeah, I should have looked it up.
that's dependent on whether
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not you'd be eligible or
Yep.
not. So, um, Gendron's birthday falls after that date, so he's stuck for this season,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
But
It's a stupid
again,
rule, but the CHL teams do it to protect themselves and basically to try to
keep
sell more
talent.
tickets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
keep talent down there. And look, he's gonna be a goal game player down there.
pretty
He's
much.
but it's cool. I mean, there's no reason to rush him at either. I mean, he's
Yeah,
not even
he's a
close
seventh
to
round
it.
pick, so
Yeah, he's AHL ready, but he's not NHL ready.
yeah,
So I have no problem with him moving. And Rhett Gardner is a veteran, Garrett Wilson's a veteran, Brandon
they'll play.
Fury is
Yeah,
24, Matt Brown is 24. Like these guys are all going to be a big part of this team. I think they're going to be pretty good.
I
I
agree.
I
Yeah.
look at this lineup; it should be able to score, should be able to play defense, and you're going to have competent goaltending
And
theoretically.
you're adding Bobby Brink or Tyson Foerster to this lineup as
Right.
well. So
Exactly. And that
yeah,
again, that doesn't include the other names that are AHL contract players. I didn't have the time prior to the show to add those guys. So I don't know.
there's a lot of depth though, but it's a good thing for the Flyers, right?
Yes.
To have more depth than
And
not here.
injuries
So
will happen. Let's be honest. We keep bringing it up, but it's just a reality. Like Avon didn't even get to play in
yeah,
training camp. And I think
exactly.
people will like Avon because he's a really good skater, like
Speedy.
very, very speedy player. He might not play center. They might move him to wing, but like I don't think he's a fourth line center guy. Like Shell, like I assume he's going to be top line left wing.
He
Matt
was
Brown
last
might take
season.
that from him.
Yeah.
It's possible. But he was almost a point per game player. I mean, I think he was right under a point per game player last year. So I think this is a good group, and I think they'll be worth watching, and hopefully they get better as the season goes on and really compete for a Calder Cup this year. It's been a long time since we saw a Phantoms team do that, and this is probably the best Phantoms team we've seen in a while, in my opinion. So I'm
Yeah,
hoping it pays off.
I think they have a chance for another playoff berth and hopefully a longer run than last time. But
And
anytime
Cutter
you
Gauthier might come to them at the end of the season too.
yeah, but anytime your AHL team can go
Hunter
on a long
McDonald.
anytime your AHL team can go on a long playoff run, right? Like it's a good thing for guys' development. So I think that's what Briere and the staff are trying to build with the Phantoms because under Flair and Fletcher in the past, like the Phantoms were not a competitive team a lot of the time. So I think in order to kind of
Did better
foster
than
that
Hextall.
yeah, but I think to foster that culture they're looking for, they want them to consistently be making the playoffs here, right? So
Yeah, you want them to have that extended success and then take that into the NHL level.
yeah, exactly.
All right, let's call the depth chart there. And I think we had a pretty good show, and that's the end of it. Anything you want to add?
No, not too much. It was a really fun show, and it's awesome that we're going to be beginning the season essentially in the next week and a half here. So we're excited. We're going to keep bringing you, weekly shows. We're going to be adding some content as well with myself doing a weekly thoughts episode and Yariv also doing a weekly thoughts episode. I think we're even going to be trying to do a monthly kind of NHL roundup and recap
We're
episode too.
still we're still working on that, but yeah.
Yeah, but we're thinking of all this stuff and we're trying to, bring the content where we can. So, we appreciate all the support. And just in terms of me and articles and stuff like that, I got some articles up on Daily Faceoff coming out all the time. So check it out. And I'm going to have season preview articles for the Flyers coming out for Flyers Nitty Gritty next week here that I'm going to get working on. So it's a fun time, for hockey, fun time to be a hockey fan. So buckle up, everybody. We're ready for the Flyer season here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And definitely make sure to check out Vasili's articles for Daily Faceoff as well as, what he writes for Flyers Nitty Gritty and what our team writes and all the content we provide. We're going to keep bringing it all throughout the season, and we're going to keep talking about the Flyers and the Phantoms. So we'll try to keep you informed on both as we move forward here. Both teams matter to us, and you saw there's plenty of talent at the AHL level that is in the mix for maybe not this season but future Flyers team. And like I said, right, end of the year there'll be even more talent coming. Guys like Hunter McDonald are of age, who might be coming over here We already know there are European players out there. We all want to see guys come over still. Kolosov is out there too. Maybe he comes over at some point as well as a goaltender, and the Flyers will want to see him. And Cutter Gauthier is a huge name there. I don't know if he'll come walking onto the Flyers at the end of this year, probably depending on their status. He is capable of playing in the NHL. We've seen that already. But they, depending on where the Flyers are in the season, if they're not looking at a playoff run, but the Phantoms are, they might give him a couple games with the Flyers and then really want him to play with the Phantoms to see if he can, similar to what Richards and Carter did back in the day, where they joined the Phantoms and elevated that team to a Calder Trophy. And a lot of those guys who won that Calder Cup ended up with the Flyers. Randy Jones was one of them. RJ Umberger was one of them. Obviously, Richards and Carter. It was a big group of guys. I think Todd Fedoruk might have been part of that group as well at one point, if I'm remembering correctly.
Riley Cote.
Riley Cote was part of that point, friend of the show. Thank you. So, a lot to be excited about. Again, I want to remind everybody to like, subscribe, share, go to iTunes, go to Spotify, all that stuff. Our stuff is there. Make sure to follow us there. Give us a rating if you can. That's, again, a humongous help. We really, really appreciate everything you guys have done for us as far as just paying attention, giving us the eyes and the ears. It's been amazing. So thank you all so much. We expect more of that. And as the Phillies roll off their season, as the Eagles kind of roll down, our viewership goes up all the time. So, we're going to obviously keep this going. But we understand if people are focused a little bit on the other teams right now, it's understandable. But for those of you who are diehard hockey fans or 24/7, we appreciate you so much. And appreciate all the messages on Twitter and all that stuff. It's awesome. Really, really awesome. Humbling stuff. So again, thank you guys. We love you. And remember, always stay gritty.